IRCC Study Permit webinar. Shikhar, can you please confirm if I'm audible?
Yes, Anandita, I can hear you.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning to all the participants who have joined the webinar today. As you can see, we will be providing information about study permit processing during the current COVID-19 pandemic through our presentation. The format of the webinar will be a presentation, and then it will be followed by a round of Q&A. During the Q&A, we will be answering the most frequently asked questions over the chat throughout the duration of the webinar, and we will not be able to address any case specific queries because we would like to provide information which will be helpful not just for one person who's asking the question, but for everyone else who might be in the process of applying for a study permit or are already Q&A box of your panel and not in the chat box. We will not be able to look at any questions which come in through the chat box. So without any further ado, I would like to invite my colleague Shikhar Gupta, the Outreach Officer for IRCC Chandigarh, to start with the presentation for today. Shikhar, over to you.
Thanks, Anandita. So, very good morning, everyone. And thank you for tuning into our webinar on study permit processing during the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Shikhar, and I'm the Outreach Officer at the Consulate General of Canada in Chandigarh. The target audience for this webinar are students from India who are interested in pursuing a Canadian post-secondary education. Before we begin, please note that the contents of this webinar are valid only as of today. For the most current information on IRCC processes and travel restrictions to Canada, please visit our website www.canada.ca/immigration. So let's begin. We know that international students make significant cultural and social contributions to Canada. They also generate more than $21 billion in economic activity. Since the onset of the pandemic, IRCC has implemented a number of temporary policy changes to support and reassure international students and designated learning institutions. The fall 2020 semester has by far the largest international student intake throughout the academic year, and this is fast approaching. The most recently implemented measures were introduced on July 14 and are aimed at this upcoming cohort. The changes will continue Canada's reputation as a premier destination for international students, and they will demonstrate the importance of international student program and the contribution international students make to Canada. We strongly encourage students to still consider studying at Canadian institutions, even if many DLIs have moved their fall 2020 semester to an online format. Moving on, our agenda for today will cover the following topics. Number one is that why you should consider studying in Canada. Next, we'll see how the application process works. Further, we'll see the restrictions to travel to Canada. Number four, we'll see exemptions to those travel restrictions. Fifth, we'll see the processing changes due to COVID-19, which includes a two-step review process, student direct stream, eligibility to work, authorized leave during studies, and the impact on the postgraduate work permit program. Then we'll cover some fraud tips, and last but not the least, what you need to know before traveling to Canada. We will end the presentation with a question and answer session. As Anandita has mentioned before, please use the Q&A box to send us your questions. We will go through them after the presentation. Before we get started on some of the changes put in place, let's focus on why you should study in Canada. Number one, our world-renowned qualifications. Canada is recognized worldwide for its outstanding quality of educational institutes. Our educators are highly trained and bring diverse perspectives to the classroom. At the university level, 2 out of every 5 academics hold at least one international degree. And we have 11 of the top 250 universities worldwide. Second is affordable education. Canada is known for having some of the lowest university tuition fee among English-speaking countries. Whatever your budget may be, you'll find something just right for you in a diverse range of education options. Third is safe multicultural communities. We are proud to say that the warm and friendly stereotype about Canadians is true. When you come to Canada, you'll find a welcoming country with a unique Canadian culture that embraces diversity. And last but not the least is a path to a promising future. Canadian colleges and university students graduate with a very strong earning potential. To protect Canadians from the outbreak of COVID 19, the Government of Canada implemented travel restrictions that limit travel to Canada. Until further notice, most foreign nationals cannot travel to Canada even if they have a valid visitor visa or an electronic travel authorization. These restrictions stop non essential or non discretionary travel to Canada. In this slide, let's look at the travel restriction exemptions for students in a little more detail. Not all students will be able to travel to Canada under the current travel restrictions. To be exempt, you must be in possession of either a study permit visa issued on or before March 18, 2020, or a port of entry letter of introduction, which indicates that your study permit was approved on or before March 18, 2020. Equally as important, you must also be able to demonstrate that it is essential for you to travel to Canada. For example, you have in person classes or you are already in the middle of your program of study and need to return to it. You can demonstrate this by providing a recently dated letter from your designated learning institute that explains why you physically need to be in Canada for the fall semester. These documents must be provided to the airline at the time of boarding and to CBSA once you reach a port of entry in Canada. Failure to do this may result in denied boarding for your flight or being forced to return from Canada at your own expense. We will not provide any travel authorization letters for students. All you need to travel is your visa or port of entry introduction letter and evidence of your essential need to travel. It is very important to note that you should not travel to Canada until at most 3 weeks before the start date of your class, for which your physical presence in Canada is required. For those who have already been issued visas for a previous semester but were not able to travel to Canada to attend, please send us a copy of your new letter of acceptance and advise us of your new start date. You can send these documents to us via the web form. Now let's look at what processing changes have been introduced as a result of the pandemic. Visa application centers, also known as VACs, are currently closed. This means we are unable to accept any paper application submissions. As such, only online submissions are being accepted. On the IRCC website, we normally publish processing times for each of our missions for all our lines of business. Please note that these processing times are no longer accurate as there are processing delays due to reduced staff at the mission. That being said, IRCC is working very hard to process all visa applications in time for the fall 2020 semester. To do this, we need your help by submitting your application as early as possible and submitting all of the required documents as soon as possible. We are aware of many service disruptions that are causing delays in submitting a complete application. For example, we know that VACs remain closed. This means there is no mechanism to submit biometrics at this time. We also know that panel physicians are operating at limited capacity. This means that it may take longer for you to obtain an appointment to complete your immigration medical exam. We also know that some businesses and schools remain closed or are operating at limited capacity. This means that it may take longer for you to obtain the supporting documents you need for your application. All of that being said, we will not refuse any applications for non-compliance or failure to submit the requested documents at this time. This means you do not have to worry about the deadline specified in the request letter sent to you. However, note that we will not be able to complete the processing of your application until all required and requested documents have been received. So it is in your favor to submit these documents to us as soon as possible. The exceptions to this are the following three documents. You must provide them upfront or your application may be refused. First is the application form. You do not have an application unless you complete the IRCC forms required. Second is the fee. This includes both the study permit processing fee and the biometrics fee. Third is the letter of acceptance, also known as LOA, from a designated learning institute or DLI in Canada. This is mandatory for you to submit with your application. Please note that we cannot physically issue any visas until the WACs reopen because we have no mechanism for two-way transmission of passports between you, the client, and us, the visa office. We are, however, attempting to return passports for any existing paper file submission as we realize this is an important identity document for you. Any documents mailed directly to the mission will be returned to the sender. So please do not attempt to send your passports directly to us. Please wait for the WACs to reopen. So I've previously indicated that only those with visas issued on or before March 18 may travel to Canada under the current travel restrictions. The recently introduced measures address applications which have not yet received approvals as of March 18. Here are those measures. First is that if your program of study will qualify you for a postgraduate work permit, also known as a Pgwp, and a part of your course, that is fall 2020 semester, has been moved to an online format because of the pandemic, the time spent on the online portion while outside of Canada will still count towards time on your Pgwp. However, the online portion must be at least 50% or less of your entire program of study. This means you will still need to complete a minimum half of a program in Canada for all that time to count towards your Pgwp. Second is that online study permit applications will be prioritized. A two-stage approval process will provide some breathing room for students who are not yet able to provide biometrics or medicals. The first stage is the approval in principle, also known as AIP. This is essentially the eligibility assessment of your application. If you receive an AIP approval, your online course time will count towards time for your Pgwp. This means you do not have to wait for a visa to be issued. Stage 2 refers to the admissibility and final decisions on an application. In cases of approval, this results in visa issuance. Please also note that an AIP approval is not a guarantee of a visa. Stage 2 includes admissibility decisions. For example, you may be refused a visa despite having an AIP because you have failed your medical exam. This chart explains the process from start to entering Canada. Prior to applying for your study permit, you should carefully research designated learning institutions, decide if you're traveling alone, prepare a budget and proof of funds, gather important documents. If you want assistance regarding the study permit process, please ensure that you seek the help of a certified immigration representative. After you receive your letter of acceptance, you can apply for a study permit. This is where the process has changed a bit and where your decision-making process has been broken up into two stages. As well, even after being issued a visa, you may still not be able to enter Canada if you're not exempt from the travel restrictions. As you can see, the assessment of your application will be broken up into two stages. Based on the current travel restrictions, even if you are issued a visa, you still will not be able to enter Canada unless you fall under an exemption. So the approval in principle applies to applications which have not yet received a final decision as of March 18, 2020. It refers to the eligibility assessment of your application. Essentially, it means that even though you're still missing medicals or biometrics, you may still be able to receive an AIP on your application. The criteria for this assessment has not changed, neither the requirements nor how an officer makes that assessment. Here are the criteria. Number one is that you're a genuine student. This means you have demonstrated the academic and language capability through the submission of your previous academic transcripts and IELTS or TOEFL scores that you're able and qualified to complete a program of study in Canada. Second is that you have been accepted by a DLI in Canada. This means you've submitted a valid letter of acceptance from a designated learning institute in Canada. Third is that you have sufficient funds to pay for your studies, living expenses, and transportation without working. This means you've submitted financial evidence of liquid funds to pay for these three things for the first year of school and demonstrated why explanation and proof of how you intend to pay for these three things, that is tuition, transportation, living expenses, for all of the remaining years of studies. Fourth is that you will leave Canada by the end of your authorized stay. This means you have demonstrated through evidence and explanation what your ties are to your home country, which will motivate you to leave Canada once your visa expires. Once you receive an AIP in your application, a letter will be sent to you electronically to relay this information to you. You may also receive requests for biometrics and medicals if you have not yet submitted them. So this provides a list of basic documents required to receive an AIP for the SDS and non-SDS stream. Let's look at the SDS list of mandatory documents for AIP. First, you need a valid letter of acceptance from a designated learning institute in Canada. Second, you need to provide IELTS test results demonstrating 6 in each module. Only in-person test results will be accepted. Please note that we are not accepting online test results. Third, you need to show a receipt or documentation from the DLI that tuition has been paid for the first year. If you also have scholarships or grants, you should also provide documentation to demonstrate this as a part of this requirement. Fourth, you need a receipt for a GIC of 10,000 Canadian dollars. Fifth, you need to submit your most recent secondary or post-secondary school transcripts. And sixth, for Quebec-bound students, you need a CAQ. For the non-SDS stream, here are the mandatory documents for the AIP. First is to submit a valid letter of acceptance from a DLI in Canada. Second is to provide IELTS, TOEFL, or PTE test results. Please again note that no online English language test results will be accepted. Third is to show documentation that demonstrates you have in liquid funds and enough money to pay for tuition, living expenses, and transportation for the first year of school, plus an explanation and evidence of how you intend to pay for all of the remaining subsequent years of school without relying on working in Canada. Fourth, you need to submit your most recent secondary or post-secondary school transcripts. And last but not the least, you need a CAQ for Quebec-bound students. Additionally, we would recommend that you submit a letter explaining why you chose a program of study. Admissibility assessments are made after AIP and before visa issuance. They include assessments such as medical, criminality, and biometrics, among other things. This means that you must provide biometrics, complete your immigration medical exam, answer all questions truthfully and completely. This includes declaring all previous visa refusals for all countries, providing all of a background history for the last 10 years, and being truthful about any previous arrests and criminal history. Also, it is very important to submit authentic documents only. It is important to note that the required documents to submit under SDS has not changed. We realize that due to service disruptions, you may not be able to submit all of the required documents to qualify under the stream. Examples of this may be upfront medicals, IELTS results, GIC, etc. If you're unable to submit a required document, for example, upfront medicals, your application will be moved to the non-SDS stream. Many of you may have questions about working in Canada and how the changes may affect your opportunity to be employed. So why is the Postgraduate Worker Permit or the Pgwp important for many students? Work experience provides a better opportunity to gain the language skills and work experience required to apply for permanent resident status in Canada. As well, Canada has some of the highest salary for workers. Additionally, if you decide to return to your home and work in another country, people who gain Canadian work experience are often able to demonstrate that they have the skills, knowledge, and critical thinking required to do the job. It is worth noting that to obtain a 3-year postgraduate work permit, the applicant must have completed a minimum of 2 years of post-secondary studies in an eligible program. You can complete more than one program and combine their length to determine your Pgwp length, but in that situation, each program has to be Pgwp eligible, including being at least 8 months in length. This section applies to students who are already in Canada. Essentially, if a student switched to part-time studies or had to take a break in studies, for example, the spring-summer semester may have been cancelled due to the pandemic, they may still continue to work on and off campus, provided that they were previously a full-time student and authorized to work on or off campus pre-pandemic. For off-campus work, the maximum limit is still 20 hours per week during the academic session and full-time during regular academic breaks. For students who are in essential services, this could include jobs in the health sector, for example. They can work more than 20 hours per week up until August 31st. To qualify for this, they need a valid study permit, must currently be in academic session, authorized to work on or off campus, and must be working in an essential job. For those who are not yet in Canada, a common question we are asked is if you can go to Canada and work those minimum 20 hours per week while taking online classes for the fall semester. The short answer to this is no. I would like to remind you of what we discussed in the earlier slides regarding what students need to demonstrate in order to travel to Canada. Unless your physical presence is required for your studies in the fall semester, it is not essential for you to travel to Canada at this time. Additionally, only students with visas issued on or before March 18 can travel to Canada under the current travel restrictions. So we have heard your concerns about having to pause mid-studies for one-year programs, so you do not need to exceed the maximum allowable time on online studies outside of Canada in order for the entire program to count towards your Pgwp. We are pleased to introduce new measures to address this. Here are the latest changes. If you're unable to travel to Canada at this time due to travel restrictions, your eligible online studies will count towards your Pgwp if you already have a study permit, or you have been approved for a study permit, or you will apply for a study permit before beginning your program of studies in January 2021. If you fall in any of the situations listed above, you can complete up to 100% of your program online while outside Canada if your program is between 8 and 12 months in length and you started your program of study between May and September 2020. This essentially means that taking an entire one-year program online outside of Canada may qualify the entire program for a Pgwp. Additionally, you can complete up to 50% of your program online up until April 30, 2021, while outside Canada if you also eventually complete at least 50% of your program in Canada. Additionally, you can complete 50% of your program online up until April 30, 2021, while outside Canada if you graduate from two different programs within 2 years of each other and each program is at least 20 and at least 50% of the combined programs is completed in Canada. This means that you could potentially complete a one-year program outside of Canada and then take another one-year program in Canada, and both programs will give you the maximum allowable time towards your Pgwp. If you decide to study and work in Canada, you may then decide to make Canada your permanent home. To begin the process of applying for permanent residence in Canada, you must submit your profile in the Express Entry online system. This will show you how many comprehensive ranking system points you have based on your education, work experience, language ability, and other factors. On a regular basis, IRCC invites the candidates with the most points in the Express Entry pool to apply for permanent residence through one of the federal economic immigration programs. If you're invited to apply for permanent residence, your invitation will tell which program you need to apply through and will have 60 days to submit your application. There are other options to apply to immigrate permanently as a worker outside of the Express Entry system. Some examples include the Provincial Nominee Program and the Atlantic Immigration Pilot. Let's look at the conditions that you must abide before air travel to Canada. The airline will require the following documents from you. First is your passport. Second is a valid study permit visa or a port of entry introduction letter issued on or before March 18. And third, Documents to demonstrate that your travel to Canada is essential. Failure to provide any of these documents may result in your being denied boarding. Additionally, you will be required to pass a health check performed by airline officials just before your flight. If you're showing any COVID-19 symptoms, you may also be denied boarding. If you are approved for boarding, please note that you must wear a non-medical mask or face covering upon arrival in Canada. So all travelers must undergo a health check upon arrival in Canada. It is also mandatory that all passengers arriving in Canada must self-quarantine for 14 days. This means that all travelers must, number one, have a plan to self-quarantine for 14 days, confirm and provide evidence that they have a suitable place to quarantine. This means providing an address and explaining how they intend to self-quarantine if other people live at the same location. Third is to explain how you intend to respect that quarantine plan. For example, how you intend to receive essential items such as food. Please do not travel to Canada unless you have a viable quarantine plan. Failure to comply has consequences, which include a fine up to 750,000 Canadian dollars, 6 months in prison, or being deemed inadmissible, removed from Canada, and banned from entering Canada for 1 year. In this section, we want to inform you of various fraud activities and misinformation related to immigration applications. You may scan the QR code on the screen as I speak. First, it is important to protect yourself. We always say that if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. You should never share your personal information with unauthorized agents. You should also never believe any claims guaranteeing you a visa. Each application is assessed on its own merit by a migration officer. Second are fraudulent websites and scams. Websites and social media accounts may claim to be from the Government of Canada. Applicants are tricked into transferring money for services that will never be provided to them. Please once again note that our official website is www.canada/immigration. Third are email scams. Please note that IRCC will never send you an email from a personal address like Hotmail and Gmail. IRCC addresses always end in .gc.ca or canada.ca. Fourth are telephone scams. Please note that IRCC will never ask you for any sort of payment by telephone. Fourth are unauthorized agents. Examples of authorized agents include members of law societies in Canada, members of Chambre de Notaire in Quebec, and members of ICCRC, which is a regulatory body for immigration consultants in Canada. You do not have to use an agent to submit an application, but if you do choose to use one, make sure that they are legally authorized to represent you. You may visit our website for more information. With respect to agents, we understand that many schools use education agents to recruit students. This is perfectly acceptable as long as their activities are restricted to recruitment. This means that they should not be providing any immigration services or advice unless they are also an authorized agent. For more information, here are the many ways to connect with us and find more information. You can see on the screen the website for IRCC, the website for the High Commission of Canada in India, our social media handles on Facebook and Twitter by the name of Canada in India, and our YouTube channel where you can find many important videos on frauds and some other important tips. So this brings us to the end of the presentation. Now it is over to Anandita to answer your questions, which you've posted in the Q&A box. Anandita, over to you.
Thank you, Shakil. So while answering the questions, what I will be doing is I will try and group them based on the different categories. And as mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, I'll try to answer first the most generic queries, which will be the information for which will be helpful for all participants here. So, with this, I begin with the first question, which will be about the category of these questions will be on essential travel. So the first question is, how do I demonstrate that my travel to Canada is essential if I have never lived in Canada? We would ask you to consult with your designated learning institute to determine if your entry into Canada is essential. If your entry into Canada is essential, the institution should provide you with a letter clearly outlining why you must be in Canada. Neither IRCC nor the High Commission provides travel authorization letters for students. The next question is, I am a student in Canada who traveled to India in March. I was not able to get a return flight after the lockdown took place. Can I travel to Canada now? The answer to this is yes. An essential reason to travel to Canada is if you were previously living in Canada and are returning home. The next question is something which is very relevant for a few students in India, and a lot of people have asked this on the chat as well. My Wi Fi is not reliable from outside Canada, so can I enter Canada to study? Every student's situation is unique. It is important for you to consult with your designated learning institute regarding options for studying online. If your internet bandwidth is not suitable, you should look at different options such as upgrading your Wi Fi. Unless your DLI advises you that in person attendance is essential, you cannot enter Canada at this time. The next question is, what if my DLI does not provide online courses and requires me to be in Canada, but I received my approval after March 18th, 2020? In this case, you will not be able to travel to Canada under the current travel restrictions, even if your DLI requires you to be in Canada. In this case, you should consider deferring your studies. The next question is, can I still go to Canada and work 20 hours a week off campus if my classes are online? The very short answer to this is no. If your classes are online, you would not have an essential reason to travel to Canada. The next question is, I was not allowed to board the aircraft leaving for Canada even though I have a valid study permit issued before March 19th. What should I do? The final determinations to allow a traveler to board an aircraft is made by the airline, often in consultation with the Canada Border Services Agency. It is your responsibility to have documentation that clearly shows that your travel to Canada is essential. Now I will be moving on to the next category of questions, which also seem to be quite a few, regarding the two-stage assessment process which is currently in place. So the first question that I'll be addressing is, what documents must I submit before September 15th, 2020 to be eligible for the two-stage processing? There are three mandatory documents you must submit. These are the completed IRCC application form, proof that your fees have been paid for your application and biometrics, the letter of acceptance for a designated learning institute in Canada. You should also submit as many of the required supporting documents as possible at the same time as your application submission to avoid delays in processing. The next question is something which I can see that a lot of people have asked us in the Q&A box. Is the two-stage processing available for winter 2021 start dates? No. The two-stage processing will only be for programs that start or have started in the spring, summer, or fall of 2020. The next question is, how do I obtain approval in principle? Is this the first stage of approval? So as mentioned even in our presentation, AIP or approval in principle happens in the stage 1 of review of your application. AIP is granted when an officer is satisfied you are eligible, will abide by the terms and conditions of your study permit, and leave Canada after your authorized stay. A lot of people are asking, what does an officer consider when reviewing an application to grant or deny an approval in principle? So the officer weighs factors including, are you or your family established? Examples of this could be a stable employment with a good salary. Other factors that are taken into consideration are, does your course of studies make sense? You should explain why you choose this course of studies. Do you have sufficient language skills to show you are able to succeed in your studies in Canada? Do you have sufficient funds to do you have sufficient funds for your studies and living expenses without relying on working in Canada? And do you have a valid letter of acceptance from a DLI? The next question is regarding documents that one must submit to receive an AIP. So people have been asking this question both for the SDS category and even for the non-SDS category. So the SDS category is of course not applicable for students who are from Nepal and Bhutan, and I can see that there are a few students from Nepal who've joined us today. So that will not be applicable for you, but for Indian students, both SDS and non-SDS requirements are applicable. So first, I'll list the documents for SDS. These are the letter of acceptance from a DLI, IELTS test results demonstrating 6.0 in each band, tuition paid for the first year, a guaranteed investment certificate or GIC for 10,000 Canadian dollars, your most recent secondary or post-secondary school transcripts, and your CAQ if you are a Quebec-bound student. For the non-SDS stream, the requirements would be a letter of acceptance from a DLI, IELTS, TOEFL, or PT results in case of English, and in case you are more fluent in French, then the tests would be TCA, TCF, and TEF. Evidence of financial ability to pay for tuition and transportation and your living expenses in Canada, your most recent secondary or post-secondary school transcripts, and your CAQ if you are a Quebec-bound student. The next question is, if I'm missing a document like medicals, can I still qualify for SDS? So the answer to this is no. If you are not able to submit all the documents under SDS, the officer will assess your application as a regular non-SDS application. What do I do if I cannot submit a document within the requested time frame? IRCC will not refuse any applications for non-compliance or failure to submit the requested documents at this time. Please submit the requested documents as soon as you are able, even if the deadline for the submission has elapsed. However, note that we will not be able to complete the processing of your application until all required and requested documents have been received. People have been asking, how will I know if the AIP is granted? So, if your AIP is granted, a letter confirming your stage 1 approval will be sent to your online account. The letter may request you to complete the rest of your requirements like your biometrics and your medicals if you have not already done so in order to be issued a study permit. The next question is, if I'm granted AIP, can I assume that once I complete my biometrics and medicals, I will get a student visa? No. AIP is not the same as being granted a visa. The officer will need to establish that you meet admissibility requirements. Note that a stage 2 refusal is uncommon provided that you are truthful in your application, that you have not provided any fraudulent documents, and that you comply with any additional requests immediately. There seem to be a lot of questions regarding when will the stage 2 admissibility decision be completed. So the answer to this is that your stage 2 admissibility decision will be assessed after AIP and before visa issuance. This includes an assessment of your medical, biometrics, as well as security and criminality background questions. If your application contains all the documents required for the stage 2 assessment, it will be assessed at the same time as stage 1. Note that we will not finalize any applications for approval until VACs reopen. And as you know, VACs or visa application centers are currently closed, and as per announcements made yesterday on our social media page, they will remain closed throughout September 2020 as well. The next question is, what requirements need to be completed to receive approval for stage 2 admissibility decision? So in order to conduct this assessment, you must provide biometrics, complete your immigration medical exam, answer all questions truthfully and completely. This includes declaring all previous visa refusals for all countries, providing all background history for the last 10 years, and being truthful about any previous arrests and criminal history, and submit only authentic documents. The next question is, what if my school starts prior to me receiving my stage 1 or AIP? So you can start school online prior to obtaining your AIP. If you receive AIP after you started school, all the time will still count towards your Pgwp or postgraduate work permit, provided that you submitted your study permit application before September 15. The next question is something which has been asked by a few people, but we are not the people for this. So the question is, will I receive a refund of my tuition fees if my application is refused when I am studying online in India with a DLI in Canada? So the answer to this is that IRCC will not be able to give you any information on this or comment on it. You need to consult your school or your institute regarding their refund policy. Next, I will be addressing a couple of questions on processing times because I see that there are quite a few questions on that right now in our Q&A box. The first question is, when can I expect a decision on my application? So there have been many service disruptions due to COVID-19 pandemic, so our processing times are no longer accurate. IRCC is working hard towards normal service delivery standards. Applications meriting a refusal are being finalized at this time. Please check your online account or email in case you may have received a refusal letter. For applications to receive visa approval, these will not be finalized until VACs can reopen. So the next question is, when can I submit my passport so I can get my visa? So the answer to this is that you will have to wait for VACs to reopen to submit your passport for visa issuance. At this time, please do not send your passport to the High Commission of Canada. We cannot accept passports at this time. If you send your passport to the High Commission of Canada, it will be returned to you at your own expense without a visa. Moving on to a few questions on language tests. So the first question is, can I submit a language proficiency test result that I completed online? If my school has accepted my result for my admission, is this sufficient? So the answer to this is no. IRCC does not accept results from online language tests. There are no changes to the language proficiency assessment score requirement. The recommended tests are still Ielts and TEF or TCF for French. Test scores from Duolingo or Ielts Indicator or any other online language test will not be accepted for any immigration application purposes, including for study permits. The next question is, what if my Ielts score is expired or about to expire? So you do not need to worry about that in this case because we will accept the Ielts results as long as they were valid on the day you submitted your application. The next question would be about PTE language or PTE test. So does IRCC accept PTE language scores as proof of language ability for a study permit application? It is recommended that you submit language scores indicated on the IRCC websites. However, if you have completed a PTE language test, you may submit your scores to IRCC using the PTE portal. Do not include your username and password in your study permit application. Next, I will be addressing a few questions on deferring your studies. So the first question is, my application is still pending. What happens if I defer my studies to a later semester? If you choose to defer your studies, ensure that you submit a new letter of acceptance using the web form as soon as possible so we can update your file. The next question is, I received approval of my study permit, deferred my studies. How do I extend my visa? In this case, you will need to apply for a new study permit with updated information because extensions of study permits are only granted to students who are already in Canada. And the next question is something which seems to be very common given the current scenario. People are asking if they can defer their studies after they receive an AIP. The answer to this is yes. However, you must submit your new LOA from your designated learning institute as soon as possible. If you change your course of study or decide to study at a different DLI, the officer may reassess your stage 1 approval in principle decision. Next question is something next series of questions is on a topic which is very popular, especially with the recent announcements which have been made to it. The postgraduate work permit or PGWP. So people are asking what percentage of my studies can be online to be eligible to obtain a PGWP. The online portion must be of 50% or more of your entire program of study. This means you will still need to complete at minimum half of your program in Canada for all of that time to count towards your PGWP. The total program of study is calculated based on the number of courses completed in Canada. The next question is, I have already completed 50% of my program online prior to the fall semester. Can I still obtain a PGWP? So the answer to this is that If you started your program in the spring or summer of 2020 and have already completed 50% of your program online, you need to make one of two choices. You can either continue to complete the remaining 50% online. This option means that none of your academic time will count towards a PGWP. Or you can defer your program of study so that you can do the remaining 50% in person in Canada. This option may qualify your entire program of study towards a PGWP. The next question is, do we have to wait for AIP for courses to count towards PGWP? The answer to this is no. As long as you submitted your study permit before September 15th, the entire fall semester will count towards the PGWP, even if you receive your AIP at a later date. Note that you still have to meet other eligibility criteria for a PGWP. The next question is, can I switch from full-time to part-time studies, and will this affect the duration of my PGWP? So for the fall 2020 semester, you must be enrolled for full-time studies for that time to count towards the PGWP. For winter, spring, and summer 2020 semesters, the duration of your PGWP will not be affected if you become a part-time student because your DLI cancelled or delayed classes due to public health measures. And now I think there's just one question regarding the next topic, which is about accompanying dependents of prospective students. So the question is, I submitted an application for my dependent along with my study permit application. Will they be processed at the same time? Yes. Applications for your spouse or your children, or if you are a prospective student, will be processed at the same time. You must provide financial documentation to show how you will be able to support your dependents without working in Canada. Let me just take another question which seems to have come in and which is also around this topic. So the question is, can my dependents travel with me to Canada if they have temporary resident visas and I have a study permit? So, to be exempt from the travel restrictions, temporary resident visa holders who are immediate family members of study permit holders require a letter of authorization from IRCC in order to travel to Canada. A request for authorization to travel can be made by sending an email, and I think the email was shared in Shikman's presentation. But because the email address is quite long, I will be sharing it with everyone over the Q&A chat box right after this part, and you can take a note of it and copy it for future use. And in the email, you need to add the following information. So the information is documentation showing that they are an immediate family member of the study permit holder, that why they need to travel for an essential purpose to Canada, and you also have to share their file number, name, and date of birth. So with that, I come to the questions which seem to have been coming in most frequently throughout the presentations and even now during the Q&A in the Q&A box. And now I would like to invite Ms. Jackie McLean, who is our client service and exceptional case here, as she will answer a few questions which seem to be a little more specific. But please do listen in because you might also find this information helpful. So, Shakir, would you take over the questions for Jackie? Thank
Yeah,
you.
sure. Thanks, Anandita. Hi, Jackie. Can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Jackie. So, Jackie, I think Anandita has answered pretty much a lot of questions, but just a few, I think, which have not been addressed. So, the first question is that can I go to some other country apart from India to give my biometrics?
Yes, you can. We're actually getting this question quite often now, and a lot of people who have US visas are asking whether or not they can travel to the United States to complete their biometrics. I believe some of the offices in the United States are open to accept biometrics. However, what I would caution you on is the fact that because you're doing your biometrics in another country does not necessarily mean that you will be able to submit your passport and that you will be able to get it in time from the visa office in the US. So if you're going there to complete your biometrics, I'm assuming that you will, at that point in time, want to submit your passport to have your, like to get a decision right away. And I'm not sure that that would be available to you because the processing times are not accurate on the website. So if you're going to the US anyway, yes, you can complete your biometrics there. When you come back to India, the VACs will remain closed for the month of September. So again, even if you complete your biometrics, at this point in time, the visa application centers are not accepting passports, and we're not accepting passports to place that counterfoil into your passport. So even if you do your biometrics, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a visa. I hope I've made that clear.
Thanks, Jackie. So the next question is that I've applied my study permit for the January 2021 intake. Only biometrics is pending in my application. Could you please clarify how my application would be considered, whether in the two-stage approval process or a full approval?
So the ones that are considered for a two-stage approval process are for spring, summer, and fall of 2020. So if you've applied for the winter session, it is not the two-stage process, regardless if you've applied before September 15th.
Thanks. Jackie, so the next question is that I have
Actually,
already...
Shakir, could I
Yes.
just add one thing to that?
Yeah, please,
At this
please.
point, at this point in time, we are prioritizing those applications for students that are starting in the fall session. So those are the ones that we're really prioritizing right now.
Right. So Jackie, the next question is that I have already received my AIP. Can I now apply for an open work permit for my spouse?
You can, you could have applied for an open work permit for your spouse at the same time. We encourage you to if we encourage you to do it in the order of which institute you're going to be studying at, who you're going to bring with you, if you're studying alone or if you have family members, and then you submit your application. So that's what we recommend, because what we like to do is see what is your full plan of going to studying in Canada and whether or not your dependents will remain in India or will they be going with you. What the visa officer considers when giving your approval is, do you have sufficient ties to your home country? One of the ties to your home country is that you have family members there. So now that your family members are planning on going with you, that does weaken your ties to your home country. So we strongly recommend that if it is always your intention to travel with your family members, please submit the application at the same time.
Thanks, Jackie. So the next question is, why are passport requests being given instead of the AIP for people with incomplete biometrics?
Actually, Shakir, can I just go back to that first question about the study permit and the AIP? You
Certainly.
should, to be clear, you should wait until after you obtain the study permit before your spouse is eligible for an open work permit. Sorry, I just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah.
Next question.
The next question is, why are passport requests being given instead of the AIP for people with incomplete biometrics?
So can you repeat that just once more?
Yeah. So what the participant is trying to say is that instead of giving an AIP for applications with incomplete biometrics, why are passport requests being given?
So passport request letters are not being given to people who have incomplete biometrics. So I'm not totally sure of the question, because when what we're focusing on right now is approval in principle, and then after the visa application centers reopen, we will look at the stage 2 when we will request the passport for the visa to be the counterfoil to be put into the passport.
Right. So Jackie, also for the next question, I would leave it up to you to answer it or not, because I don't think we have yet reached the second stage processing in study permits. So the question says that why students are getting rejections after getting the AIPs. Maybe you just want to touch upon the reasons why a student may be rejected, because I don't think we've reached the second stage processing as of now, as far as I know.
That is correct. And so the reason for why you would receive a stage 2 refusal is based on your admissibility. Admissibility means that you you do not have a criminal background, you're not security concerned, that you answered the information on your application truthfully, that you submitted authentic documents. So for students, this cohort does not have a lot of refusals based on security concerns or even for criminality. Where we do see refusals on the second stage, and it's, again, we want to give assurances to students that stage 2 refusals do not happen very often. By far the majority of refusals happen because of eligibility. The officer is not satisfied that you would be a genuine student that would have sufficient ties to your home country and would return after an authorized stay. That's usually why a refusal is done. So the admissibility is if you did not answer the information truthfully, particularly if you have been refused a visa for Canada or another country, or you've been deported or removed. If that has happened, you have to answer that question truthfully. The second thing is that you have provided documents that are not authentic. So we have verified the documents at the second stage and realized that the information or the documents that you've provided are not authentic. Last, we do see some refusals because somebody is not necessarily medically inadmissible. Medically inadmissible is 2 stages. So somebody who has a communicable disease like Ebola virus. So that is obviously very rare. The second thing is that they would have excessive demand on our health or social services. So somebody that has tuberculosis would be instructed by their panel physician to undergo a series of treatments. If the student does not comply with that to complete the treatment, then we would refuse based on non-compliance. Not necessarily are they medically inadmissible, but that is what we see most often, is that they don't comply with the request of the panel physician.
Also, Jackie, just to bring in that you may want to comment that the question I just asked you may be a fraud case, because we haven't really, started the stage 2 processing, and so there can't really be any, rejections in the second stage, I would say. So maybe you would take this opportunity to tell the participants a little bit more about, the kind of frauds,
So I think that's a good question. Is part of eligibility is being, again, satisfied that you're a genuine student. If you have submitted fraud documents or have not answered truthfully, even at the eligibility stage, the officer obviously would not think that you are a genuine student. So they could refuse you on eligibility because of fraud. Fraud doesn't just come in the stage 2. We do look at that at stage 1. So if you don't answer something truthfully, or if you have submitted non-authentic documents, it's not going to satisfy the visa officer that you're a genuine student.
Thanks, Jackie.
Does that answer the question a little bit more, Shakir?
Yeah, yeah. I just thought that since we haven't gone to that stage of processing, so maybe, the question wasn't really accurate. So you could inform the participants of the kind of frauds we see.
We do see fraud in one of the questions that we often receive is how come I cannot provide my language testing online? And it is because we do see fraud in language results. And that's why we have to be very careful to only accept in-person testing. So we do see fraud in language results. Why we strongly encourage people to still apply under SDS, because it's easily verifiable that you've paid for your tuition and that you have a GIC. So sometimes it's not even the fault of the student, but rather the representative have more money or they're more established than what they are. So make sure that you use an authorized representative. That is very important. If you use an authorized representative and they do not, then you have the ability to go back and report your authorized rep to the ICCRC or to the Law Society and indicate what they have done, and there will be repercussions for them. However, if you choose to use an agent or someone that is not authorized to represent you, you do not have any way to report them and show that in actual fact it was the representative that didn't submit the documents required for your application or didn't submit the correct information.
Thanks, Jackie. So the next question, I'm not sure if you have an accurate answer to that, but we are getting a lot of questions to that effect. Is that can we expect to travel to Canada before December?
Gosh, I wish I knew. So the thing is, really the travel restrictions are happening month by month. So you will notice that the travel restrictions were until August 1st. Now they've been extended into. So really, it depends of our healthcare system, the situation in not a large number of people with the coronavirus. So I don't have an answer, as you alluded to, Shakir, but we strongly encourage you to watch our Facebook social media pages to find out the different changes in the travel restrictions.
Thanks, Jackie. So I'll move on to the next question. It says that if I've already deferred from fall to winter, will it affect my eligibility in the AIP? And how do I submit the new letter of acceptance in this case?
So the visa officer will look at the documentation that you have now. And if you have already deferred, what we would suggest you do is submit that deferral through the web form. So you can search through just Googling IRCC web form. It will come up and you submit your documentation indicating that you have deferred your studies through the web form. Until that happens, it's likely that the officer will assume that you will be going to school with your current letter, provided that it has not expired.
Thanks, Jackie. So the next question we have is that whenever VFS centers open, then how long will it take to receive final decision after providing our biometrics?
So that's a difficult question to answer because a lot has to do with volumes and our capacity. So I can't give a definite answer on that. It will also depend on the priorities at the time. So right now, students are top priority. We're trying to get as many cases done, and I'm sure many of you have already received your approval in principle, and will acknowledge the fact that over the last couple of weeks, we have decisioned many cases. So once that has been done, we will move to prioritizing second stage approvals.
Thanks, Jackie. So the next question is that if my classes have already begun and I get my approval in principle at a later stage, so will the time between when my classes started and when I got my AIP be counted towards the PGWP?
Yes, it will. That's an easy one to answer. Yes, it will.
Thanks,
So you
Jackie.
can start studying. I know some, I've been watching the questions come through during the webinar, and I know there's a lot of questions about DLIs asking people for their approval in principle letter prior to allowing them to study. And so that's why we are prioritizing it. But you can absolutely start studying without that approval in principle letter.
Right, Jackie. So the next question is that I applied for student visa under SDS for fall intake and then I got my approval in principle. Later, I deferred it for the winter intake. However, the university increased the tuition of first year by 500 Canadian dollars. Will this application will now be processed under the SDS if I do not pay the balance 500 Canadian dollars?
Okay, so after you receive your approval in principle, uh, the if you decide to defer, or if the DLI changes the tuition fees, it really doesn't affect your second stage of approval. You should still submit the letter indicating that you're deferring your studies through the web form. But what the officer will be looking at is, do you continue to meet eligibility requirements, and now do you meet admissibility requirements? So I can't really comment about the increase in fees, because I'm assuming that is something you're going to have to talk to your DLI about. Perhaps I'm missing part of the question, so hopefully that has answered it.
Yeah, it has, Jackie.
Okay.
So we'll move on to the next question. It says this question again we get pretty often is that can a full-time student who's studying online work full-time in India?
Yes, I always found that this is an interesting question. So obviously we cannot and will not, what you do in India during the time that you study is completely up to you. What we strongly recommend, though, is that you make sure that your studies are the priority, because we want to make sure that you're successful in your studies. However, if you're the super student that can work and study at the same time, then you're more than welcome to do so.
Thanks, Jackie. So maybe we can take one more question. It says that is September 15 the last date for providing approval in principle?
Yes, at this time, September 15th is the last date.
All right, Jackie, thanks for answering the questions. And I think that would bring us to the end of the FAQs. Would you like to give some closing remarks, Jackie?
Just that, again, I know that there's a lot of anxiety amongst students. You've invested a lot of money. You had plans, obviously, that have been derailed because of COVID. Many people have experienced a lot of anxiety and unrest due to the pandemic. And we're doing our best to be able to look at options in order for you to still consider Canada as a place to study. And we hope that even though it wasn't what you envisioned to happen, that you will still consider the experience worthwhile, in some ways, I think the online studies is a good thing, because it allows you to learn about the educational system in Canada while you don't necessarily have to go through some of the other integration problems that students face it with moving to a new country. So again, even though what you may not have envisioned, but we still hope that your school year will be successful. And thank you for still considering to choose Canada.
Thanks, Jackie. So I would like to thank all of you for joining us for today's webinar. I hope the information provided was helpful to you. Once again, please note that the contents of the webinar were valid only as of today. For the most current information, you can continue to follow us on our social media handles, as well as visit our website for all the latest updates. Thanks a lot for joining us. Have a good day.